Dorothy Rothschild was born in Jersey, but liked to call herself a true New Yorker since her parents moved her and her three older siblings to 72nd and Broadway, then simply called the Boulevard, before Labor Day in 1893. A month before she was 3, Dorothy's mother died and the family moved once again, this time to 68 and Columbus Avenue. Luckily, they remained close to Riverside Park, where she loved to walk her dogs, something she enjoyed until the end of her days. Unlike people, dogs were innocent, loved unconditionally, and asked very little of her. Apart from walking her dogs, Dorothy spent a lot of her youth reading. She was never close to her siblings and did not have many friends. In 1903, her father's second wife, whom Dorothy never liked, died in the family's second New York home. Though the family was Jewish, Dorothy's stepmother was hell-bent on saving her Jewish soul for Jesus, hence Dorothy's formal education at the Blessed Sacrament Convent at 79th in Amsterdam. She was then shipped off to Miss Dana's Academy in Jersey to learn how to be a lady.
Have you ever drawn from those years for story material?
All those writers who write about their childhood, gentle God, if I wrote about mine, you wouldn't even sit in the same room with me.
What, then, would you say is the source of most of your work?
Need of money, dear. By 1908, the Rothschilds were living at 80th and Riverside Drive. In 1913, her father died. She lived on her own for the first time from 1915 to 1917 in a boarding house on 103rd and Broadway. By this time, she had sold her first poem, Any Porch, to Condé Nast Vanity Fair for $12. My husband often says, Elise, you feel things too deeply, you do. Yes, 40 a month if you please. Oh, servants, impose on me too. I don't want the vote myself, but woman with property, dear. I think the poor girl's on the shelf. She's talking about her career. Dorothy hated this poem in retrospect. Her hair was bobbed, a fashionable but controversial choice. America's sweetheart, Mary Pickford, summarizes the bob or not to bob debate beautifully, accidentally.
I could give a lengthy and I think convincing discourse about long hair making a woman more feminine, but there is some doubt in my mind as to whether it does or not. Of one thing I'm sure, she looks smarter with a bob, and smartness rather than beauty seems to be the goal of every woman these days.
She was hired as a copy editor for Vogue, another Nast publication, in 1915, and was on staff at Vanity Fair by 1917. That same year, she married Eddie Parker, and Eddie Parker left to fight in World War I. Dorothy spent a lot of time in their home on 72nd and Broadway alone. The vicious circle began to meet in 1919, and soon after Mrs. Parker was fired by Vanity Fair in the plaza for being, quote, overly critical. Eddie had returned from war, a drug-addicted, insecure, and demoralized alcoholic. They separated in 1920, living in different rooms at 76 and West and Ave. She lived with Eddie once again at 57 West 57th. They were miserable. In 1922, Dorothy had an abortion. Many believe the child was not Eddie's. She rented a room in the Algonquin, separated from Eddie, on and off again between 1924 and 34. The vicious circle was still meeting daily. The group was witty, barbed, radical, and very popular in their time. Of them, and herself, Dorothy writes, They come clean with the news that war is a horrible thing, that injustice still exists in many parts of the globe even to this day, that the very rich are apt to sit appreciably prettier than the very poor. Even the tenderer matters are not smeared over with romance for them. They've taken a calm look at this marriage thing, and they are there to report it is not always a lifelong trip to Niagara Falls. You will barely be able to stagger when the evening is over. In fact, once you've heard the boys settling things, it will be no surprise to you if any day now one of them works it all out that there's nothing to this Santa Claus idea. One product of these gatherings was the birth of the New Yorker, first published in 1925. Dorothy wrote for that publication eventually as well. Another product was the heavy consumption of alcohol. In the 1994 film Mrs. Parker and the Vicious Circle, we find another cynical take on the Algonquin's famous diners.
It's not what you're suffering, Mrs. Parker. It's what you're missing. In my opinion, you and your friends are missing a great deal. It's insecurity, this compulsion to be constantly with each other, to be constantly entertaining, but never discussing one subject for long, never in depth. The serious side of your nature is lost. Your purpose. And then you can't write. I think life is something more than being able to breathe.
And maybe there's some truth in that. She seemed to be very cavalier about her own life. By this time, she had tried to commit suicide 3 times, something she casually addresses in one of her most famous pieces.
Resume. Razors pain you, rivers are damp, acids stain you, and drugs cause cramp. Guns aren't lawful, Nooses give. Gas smells awful. You might as well live.
I'm going to take a second now to go through the men Dorothy Parker had sex with, because that seems to be what everyone who has written anything about her life is so obsessed with. Most of these you've probably not heard of, and it's not an all-inclusive list, but who cares? Historians enjoy pointing out that she slept with Fitzgerald and Hemingway, who wrote a poem about her later, as if it should be a pat on the back, or their way of comprehending how a woman might be able to participate in the man's game, especially in the early 1900s. I've never heard about Fitzgerald sleeping with her in all my time studying him, who, by the way, was commercially successful in his lifetime, but is not, for some reason, dismissed by critics for that reason the same way Dorothy Parker is. It all brings to mind a poem Dorothy wrote called Frustrations. If I had a shiny gun, I could have a world of fun, speeding bullets through the brains of the folk who give me pains. Or had I some poison gas, I could make the moments pass, bumping off a number of people whom I do not love, but have I no lethal weapon. Thus does fate our pleasures step on. So they still are quick and well, who should be, by all rights, in hell.
Dorothy Parker spent the last 15 years of her life here, fairly miserable, and then died of a heart attack. Sad thing is when I visited, the people working there had no idea who she was, and had no idea this wonderful, brilliant woman had once lived there. Why don't we remember her? We're so busy going through the list of men she slept with. What if we went through the list of things she accomplished? She wrote for Vanity Fair, Vogue, The New Yorker, Life, McCall's, Esquire, Ainsley's, The Saturday Evening Post, Ladies' Home Journal, Everybody's. She published Women I'm Not Married To, Men I'm Not Married To before she was 30, wrote Closed Harmony, Bobbed Hair, Business is Business, Enough Rope, Sunset Gun. She won the O. Henry Award for The Big Blonde. She wrote Laments for Living, Death and Taxes, After Such Pleasures, and this was all before 1933. I personally think that Dorothy Parker was absolutely amazing. She was hysterical. She was brilliant. But after going on this walk and trying to really see what her life was like, this woman that I've always respected disappointed me, because she never lived up to her own standards and never really loved herself. From my perspective, Dorothy Parker had it all. She lived a life that I would kill for. Maybe I'm choosing not to see how horrible it really was. But she was never looking for happiness in the right places. And it's disgusting to me that people remember all the men she slept with and nothing else, or her witty one-liners about getting drunk and falling under the table. But she did project that, and she allowed herself sometimes to be the joke. So while I find it admirable that she came from nowhere and made a name for herself, and I would love to do the same, she's not someone that I really ever aim to be. Because change is good, and I'm glad I'm out of Texas, and I'm glad I'm in the middle of something. But it's not everything. Because at some point you can't just work for a goal or look for happiness in something else like Dorothy Parker always did, in men or booze. I think at some point you have to realize that the world is a lot bigger than yourself. Look outside of that. And just be happy where you are. And that might sound cheesy and ridiculous, and maybe it's not what was expected to be taken away from a study on Dorothy Parker, but that's what I found. She deserves much more respect than she was given, but she never respected herself. And so, in her honor, I will. Thank you.